I was picked up by the SBU on Friday, April 15th at a little after 1 p.m. local time. Um, I'm okay physically. I'm a little rattled.
They found him. So Gonzalo Lira shows up after a week of his disappearance. In fact, he says he was detained by the Ukrainian Security Services, the SBU. So no, he wasn't beheaded by a group of Nazis in Ukraine. And yeah, there were just so many crazy conspiracy theories. I was pretty sure the next thing that these loopers would be claiming is that Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was probably drinking Gonzalo's blood in his matzo soup. Anyways, a lot of people wrote to me about where I thought Gonzalo was, including a lot of people who were pro-Russian, wanting to know if I knew where Gonzalo was because they were terrified for his safety. And in general, you should have been worried that he'd been detained at least because, yeah, he'd been spewing a lot of pro-Russian propaganda points over the last few weeks. It is day 60 of Ukraine's war, by the way, against Ukraine. For reference, I'm here in Budapest. I've relocated here temporarily with the war from Ukraine, and Gonzalo was, doing all this journalistic work. That's a laughable term to describe him. Go into that a little bit in this video. So yeah, just want to outline in today's video how Gonzalo Lira got himself into this big legal mess in Ukraine for himself, why he's been detained, also how the media kind of works in a country that's been invaded. It's not a normal situation. A lot of people wrote to me, especially those who were pro-Russia in this war, didn't seem to understand that when a country gets invaded, you don't have a right to just go and film and say what you want anymore like you would in peacetime. So I'll go into a little bit about that. And also, at the end of the video, I'll reveal one particular post that he made that should leave you with absolutely no doubt about why the Ukrainian government would be justified in detaining him. So let's get into the video. Поехали.
Tsar Experience.
Even if it runs counter to the mainstream narrative, critical thinking should not be a death sentence. Unfortunately for Gonzalo Lira, it seems it was.
This young British guy, who seems to be living in St. Petersburg, is now running a channel that basically just parrots the latest propaganda news from Russia and the war. He's having a breakdown. He is reduced to tears because Gonzalo has been beheaded by the Nazis. What the girls of St. Petersburg must think of British lads if this is what they meet. They definitely know Nastashi Mujik is this guy. So this British guy is not reduced to tears by the absolute devastation of Ukraine. Cities like Mariupol completely razed. Reports of war crimes, mass rape, looting, probably, who knows how many civilians have been killed. Bombs in the center of, say, Odessa city where I used to live, striking residential buildings, killing civilians, young children. Even if he doesn't care about the Ukrainians, probably got like somewhere between 15 and 20,000 maybe dead Russian soldiers. Doesn't move this guy to tears. What moves him to tears is the idea that his journalistic hero, Gonzalo Lira, has been beheaded. And something like you'd expect from ISIS in Ukraine. And how could someone believe such a story? Well, within this kind of echo chamber, I guess, that they're living in, with all their propaganda about the Nazis having taken over Ukraine and Zelensky, Gonzalo himself was propaganda this, that he's an evil Nazi with his thugs, hunting down people on a daily basis. And living in Ukraine is basically like living in some sort of dystopia. Interesting question for Gonzalo would have been, well, why the hell did you choose to live there if it's so terrible? But anyways, one of the main instigators for all this hysteria is a guy I reacted to my last video, in fact, Scott Ritter. And he was on last night talking about Kharkiv is under the control of the Nazis. I mean, if that's the kind of echo chamber propaganda worldview that you have, and of course it sounds plausible that they're beheading Chilean American citizens. Just think about how mad that would be. In a time of war where America and Chile, both of Gonzalez nationalities, are helping the Ukrainians are going to behead, quite literally behead, one of their citizens. I mean, I guess anything is possible, but it's definitely not going to be the Zelensky regime, as they love to call him, who's going to do something so preposterous. So let me read you what Scott Ritter put on his Telegram channel. Well, first of all, he starts by describing when Roman Protasevich, the Belarusian co-founder of Niekta, which is a Telegram channel, was abducted by the Lukashenko government. And he kind of misrepresents it completely, because the big issue there was the fact that Lukashenko diverted a plane, a Ryanair commercial flight, to land in Minsk. It wasn't scheduled where they could nab him, and they sent up a fighter jet to persuade it to land, and obviously a fake bomb threat. Oh, and we have sirens going off there behind me. And that's why the world went mad about it. I mean, Lukashenko unfortunately throws a lot of people in prison, and we get mildly upset about it in the West. Because we're kind of used to it at this stage. But anyways, let me read. When reports emerged that Gonzo Lira, a Chilean social media influencer, in inverted commas, who resided in, he says Kharkov, it's actually called Kharkiv in Ukraine, and who published online content critical of the Ukrainian government, was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by the Kraken unit, part of the Azov battalion affiliated with the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, the West is silent. Free speech isn't a one-way street. To remain silent in the murder of Gonzo Lira is to be complicit in his death. Wow, if you didn't speak up about something that didn't happen, you're now complicit in an emerging murder. And the deaths of all journalists who pursue the truth, even if it runs counter to the mainstream narrative, critical thinking should not be a death sentence. Unfortunately for Gonzo Lira, it seems it was. And then the next day, when weak men like that British guy start crying on YouTube about his death. A point of clarification, I have no direct evidence that Gonzalo has been killed. Then why would you publish it, Scott Ritter? I was clear I was referring to reports emerging. No, you weren't clear about that at all, about his demise. But Gonzo said any disappearance of more than 12 hours should be treated as if something bad had happened to him. It has been 5 days. If this had been a New York Times reporter disappearing in Russian-controlled territory, it would be headline news, especially if a Chechen hunter-killer team had taken credit for his death. But with Gonzo's silence, which was the whole purpose of the post, to raise awareness about his disappearance. So there you see, when you're being reckless with publishing innuendo, rumors, then you create all this panic amongst people, because when in their echo chamber, you know, it's very sensationalist in YouTube to get attention. So claiming that he's been murdered, kidnapped, and all this hysteria just because the guy didn't answer on social media for a few days. Yeah, it just like feeds within that echo chamber. And since they're all in general exaggerating everything to start with, they end up with this, you know, crazy situation. Gonzalo obviously contributed to that by saying, if you don't hear from me for a certain number of hours, whatever, 12 hours, then assume the worst has happened. And yeah, he was blaming, I'll go into that in a second, the Daily Beast, because they published an article on him. And he said, yeah, they're going to get him killed. So let's find out why we had all this hysteria amongst these pro-Russian propaganda pirates in general, since they're just, a lot of them just reporting the news and Russian talking points during this war. So Gonzalo Lira is a Chilean-American YouTuber. He had a basically dating advice channel. I reacted to a few of his videos about dating before, and also one at the start of this war where he just had this insane propaganda. And I reacted to him about the war because out of nowhere, he had deleted all his previous content almost entirely on his YouTube channels, and then appeared on this other YouTube channel called The Duran on the eve of the war. Yeah, it sprouts propaganda points from basically the Russian side, just ad nauseum on their channel, which seems to be their business model. And actually, by the way, that's one that I knew will be super successful during this war, because especially with like Russia Today and Sputnik getting taken off the air, especially with those channels getting taken off the air in the West, well, where is that hungry audience for pro-Russian propaganda going to get its fix? Well, in-step other YouTubers, and their audiences, of course, explode during this war because they feed that audience. That's why you see Scott Ritter on so many of these channels, and Gonzalo with his live streams. But basically, they had set him up as being their man in Kharkiv just before the war. Now, Gonzalo, for all intents and purposes, doesn't have any experience with geopolitics, military analysis, anything. He's just, I guess, a willing person to be there in Kharkiv since he lived there.
You know, making snipers' nests or something like that, or putting anti-tank traps or something like that.
Grandmas with guns that we've been...
That's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. Life is going on as usual. And I am here 40 kilometers from the Russian border. Kharkov is the first city that will be taken in any potential war between Russia and Ukraine. No one over the age of 12 or with an IQ over 90 seriously believes that the Russians are going to invade anytime soon.
So the war starts, and Gonzalo, as I pointed out in the other video, which I'll link up above and below, he basically starts running around Kiev at first and saying a lot of very unusual things, erratic things about the war, that, yeah, it's all Zelensky's fault, the Ukrainian president, because he doesn't surrender. Maybe the Russians could just leave. That would end the war. He's handed out all these guns. People in Ukraine are terrified of not the Russian shelling the Russian soldiers, but the Ukrainians who have been given weapons to defend the city of Kiev. He doesn't provide any evidence of that. But anyways, that's another story. So there are a lot of erratic things, just very odd things that he was saying. And then on top of it, he didn't seem to have evacuated his wife and kids out of Ukraine, which for a guy who's claimed to be Coach Red Pill, I mean, traditional generals, you should have first responsibility, wife and kids out into a safe place, because obviously Ukraine is not safe with the war. And that just struck me as very odd. And I don't really know why you wouldn't just take care of that first. It seems grossly irresponsible. Then he also didn't evacuate himself from the war. He decided to stay on. Again, pretty strange to stay in a country where you're basically parroting propaganda for the invading army, especially if the invading army hasn't taken over the country and achieved their objectives in the first few days. Then, you know, do you really want to stay there and put yourself in obviously a lot of danger anyways because there's a war going on, but on top of it, be clearly openly on the side of the invading army? And by the way, it was possible to leave Kharkiv. That's where he had been living. It was hard and it was dangerous, but I helped a client get his girlfriend out, for example, during that time period. I watched another YouTube channel. This is very important to understand about this guy's mindset. Rich Cooper. And Rich Cooper played a clip from Gonzalo Lira's Patreon, where Gonzalo says a year ago that he has basically a terminal illness and he has 1 to 2 years to live.
But he's talking about he's recently been diagnosed with a heart condition. This, from what I understand, was about a year ago. So, you know, he figured out there's only so many grains of sand left in the hourglass. And I guess he decided to spend that time reporting on what was going on with the conflict with Ukraine and Russia. It looks like he had a bit of a death wish again, you know, immersing himself in that area. And at least we know now that he had a heart condition that didn't give him a very long period of time to live. Who knows what else was going on in his personal life. He was pretty private about that.
So when I saw that just recently, finally understood what was going on with this guy. And Rich Cooper, basically, who knows him, says that he appears to have a bit of a death wish. And of course, if the guy has less than a year to live, and yeah, he's not obviously going to be as fearful of death compared to someone who isn't living those circumstances, right? So then kind of explains a lot of his erratic and pretty crazy behavior and very provocative behavior because it lacks common sense. I mean, repeating all these Russian talking points and you're sitting in a nice studio in London or Paris or wherever it happens to be, yeah, you're pretty safe because you know, what's the worst that's going to happen to you? Maybe you get taken off YouTube or off the air, but, you know, you're probably safe enough that you're not going to be arrested by the British government. Not 100% sure, but anyways, compared to sitting in Kharkiv in Ukraine, definitely very different dynamics. So Gonzalo was doing such a good job of being, you know, the man on the ground for the Duran, for example, that pro-Russian social media picked up on him. and they started to circulate these videos with Russian subtitles. So imagine you're doing the propaganda for Russia so well that they said, hey, we don't even need to make our own videos. We can just take this guy's video. Yeah, we can just put Russian subtitles on it. And he started to get massive traction on Russian social media. Even I spotted it.
And if you want to say that the message I'm saying is pro-Russian or pro-Putin, or I'm a Putin stooge or useful idiot or whatever, fine. I don't care. I mean, I don't really care your opinion, man. I don't give a fuck what you think about me. I'm telling you the truth. I'm here. I'm here in Kiev, in the downtown, waiting for the Russians to invade the damn place, huh? So I know what I'm talking about.
And that caused him apparently to panic a little bit. He made this video saying that he had never insulted the Ukrainian military, which is not true at all.
This invasion, the Russian invasion, is stalled. When it's not, it's ending, actually. I mean, quite frankly, the Zelensky regime doesn't have much more than a week or two left, because all of their forces are split up. All of their forces are completely surrounded in different pockets throughout the country. All of their forces are slowly running out of gasoline, water, and food, and ammunition. And there's no possibility of relief. It's over. The Russians have won. I would never in a million years insult the Ukrainian people, especially when I live in Ukraine. Why? I mean, how big of a fool would I have to be to insult the people whom I share a city with, a country with?
And yeah, he seemed to panic a little bit. He put up this video, he deleted again. He does that a lot. All these guys do this a lot. They put up videos and then they delete them again when whatever they're predicting normally it doesn't turn out to be true. See quite a bit. And then he basically calls for war crimes against the Azov battalion in Mariupol. Good riddance to them. They'll be strung up.
And Mariupol is about to fall. And all those fascist, thuggish, kidnapping, murdering Azov people, they're going to be hung. Yeah, they're going to be captured and hung by the Russians. The Russians have said so already. Good riddance to bad rubbish, by the way. Those Azov people are fascist pigs.
That sounds pretty deranged to say if you are living in Ukraine during the war and you're openly calling for, whether you like the Azov battalion or not, Azov regiment and the founders and whatnot. I have another video about that up here and down below on a card. And in this video description, but like making light or, you know, basically advocating that they get murdered in a war crime, probably not the smartest thing to do if you want to stay alive, which apparently is not Gonzalo Lira's highest concern at the moment.
I have always considered myself a guest in Ukraine, and therefore, like a good guest, I think it's wrong for me to interfere in the internal politics of the country, let alone interfere, even have an opinion. Because quite frankly, I am a guest. And so for me to be spouting off some opinion or other would be completely wrong. I mean, I don't go to your house and tell you how to, you know, fix the furniture in your house. No, that's your business. And if you invite me to your home, I am thankful to you, but I will never say a word about what I think of your furniture or decor, because that is your business, not mine. And that's how I've always felt insofar as politics, whenever I live in a city, in a country rather, that I'm not a citizen of. Because it's just wrong. It's wrong to talk about the politics of a country where you are a guest in that country.
He also made a lot of more erratic statements about, you know, he's a guest, he's I guess a temporary or permanent resident in Ukraine, he's not a Ukrainian citizen, and you shouldn't interfere in the politics where you are, but that's exactly what he's doing. And you have to think about, well, what is the point in all these content that he produces? I mean, what effect is it supposed to have, other than maybe making some money from the advertising revenue or building up an audience that can be monetized, which some of the others do. I'm not really so sure how Gonzalo does it. Well, think about two things. One, Ukraine is very dependent on Western armaments at the moment and Western money because it's been invaded. The World Bank, I think, predicts that its economy is going to contract by 50% this year. And obviously in a war with supposedly the second best army in the world, if the West stops sending those or refuses to send more, then it will have an impact in the war, right? So all these things like Ukraine should surrender, it's all Zelensky's fault for not surrendering, and all the Ukrainians are dying it's all Zelensky's fault, it's never Russia's fault, which would be logical since they invaded the country. So that's one thing that is, I guess, they're trying to achieve. Not so successfully so far, it seems. And I guess the other thing could be, since he was actually circulated all over pro-Russian media, to convince Russians that they're right, because here we have this American, Chilean guy on the ground and telling them, yes, the Russians are right, the Russians are the goodies, not the baddies, and trying to convince them, even though they've launched this imperialistic war, which you're not allowed to say in Russia so far. It's a special military operation, right? So those would be, I guess, the two things they're trying to achieve with this line. And it's not just Gonzalo or de Duran, it's all of them. Colonel McGregor, Scott Ritter, Tucker Carlson, all this is George Galloway. It's all the same kind of direction in terms of what they're trying to achieve on a political level. Now, on top of that, the Daily Beast wrote an article about him. He called it a hit piece. They're trying to get him killed.
But the guy hates my guts something fierce. I mean, to spend all that effort and energy writing an article about little old me, come on. You only do that when you really admire somebody or you really hate them. And so this guy, cast all kinds of aspersions at me, trying to, with all these weasel words that they're so good at, to try to smear me and claim that I was this, that, the other. Okay. So I found it funny. I mean, I really did.
I read it. The stuff about when he was a dating coach, obviously I don't agree with the Daily Beast on a lot of things. But anyways, they kind of summed up that he was a pro-Putin shill, which he even owns anyways in his videos. So let's sum up what we have from the Ukrainian perspective, the Ukrainian government's perspective, since he's in Ukraine. We have a foreign citizen who is I presume a resident, who's a guest there in the country, who is spouting pro-Russian propaganda points at a time when Russia has just invaded the country, and he's calling for or advocating in some shape or form war crimes against a particular part of the Ukrainian armed forces, right? Now, do you think that the Ukrainian government should maybe tolerate his presence in the country, since that is why he is there? Presumably that's why he stayed on, for that purpose, basically with his propaganda to aid and abet the Russian army, right? There's no other way to describe it. He's not taking part in the hostilities and in the fighting, but he's kind of there behind enemy lines, so to say, waging his own insane propaganda war. And if he were Ukrainian, then I guess he would be up on sedition and treason charges, but because he's a foreigner, that's not going to be the case. He's going to be subject to a whole raft of other laws. Occasionally when I glance at his channel, because I couldn't watch the guy after about a week of the war, because it was just so, I found it pretty revolting, his videos, but it's up to you if you want to watch them or not. And my big question was, how come the Ukrainians haven't detained him yet? I mean, they were able to kill all these Russian generals and locate them. How come they just can't pick up Gonzalo? It can't be that hard. He created all this drama that the SBU come to his house and now found him and he escaped and gone somewhere else. And I think with his phone they could have geolocated him pretty quick. Since he was filming on that, I would imagine. Anyways, I just didn't really understand why they hadn't just picked him up and done what they appear to have done now, which is taking his control away from his ability to use his own channel. Of course, he's on these other channels anyway, sprouting the same stuff. But in short, I guess he really wasn't considered that important. Just that people kept writing to me about him, especially when he went missing, about where he was. But in the greater scheme of things in this war, well, he's apparently just not really top priority for the Ukrainians. But anyways, they changed that and they picked him up and they detained him for a week. So a lot of people who wrote to me said, oh, what happened to freedom of speech in Ukraine? It's supposed to be a democracy, and now they've detained this journalist.
Unfortunately, it's no news, which under these circumstances means bad news. And what's really depressing and disgusting in all of this are the number of people rejoicing in, at the very least, the arrest of a journalist, and at the very worst, much, much worse, to a journalist. In fact, you might not even consider Gonzalo Lira to be a journalist, but if you think this is a good precedent, that this is somehow justifiable, even in a time of war, you have no idea the Pandora's box that you are opening right now.
So let's just talk a little bit about what happens when you have a war in a country and it gets invaded, and what happens to your freedom of speech. So Ukraine has martial law, And that basically curtails the normal freedoms, along with other laws that have been passed in this time of war. And there are good reasons for that. We would have the same provisions in most Western democracies that in this extreme situation, which is an invasion of the country, that you don't have the same rights to, say, be, well, in this case, a self-published media or journalist, or you basically don't have the same rights to free speech, especially if they, aiding and abetting, in effect, the invading army. Well, you kind of say that's probably not a good idea to give people the right to do that, because it would undermine the state's ability to defend the country and its people if you allow people to do that, whether the citizens or, in Gonzalo's case, just a guest in the country, which he even said in his video that you shouldn't do that, but then he goes and does it anyway. Again, extremely erratic behavior, but from a guy with apparently some sort of death wish. Anyways, so let me give you a bit of an example, a good example when I was back in Ukraine, and how people like actually Gonzalo make things a little bit dangerous even for me, who's obviously not propagating on the Russia's behalf or really even on Ukraine's behalf at the end of the day, because I just kind of give my own opinion about what's going on. And since the Russian side has been lying since the beginning, basically most people on the Ukrainian side are going to be more accurate about this war. So I was in Mukechevo, for example, and streaming, and I was being very careful not to film anything that would be, of any importance. Obviously, so any soldiers, any police, any buildings that might have some significance, any bridges. And yeah, the Ukrainian soldiers came up to me in the street and they were like, yeah, what are you doing? Filming. And I explained what I was doing. They obviously see my ID and then wanted to see my phone to see if I was filming something that would be sensitive or, of value to the invading army. And yeah, they've had a big problem with, obviously you have all these saboteurs who were helping the Russian army, and they were obviously filming stuff, or you have spotters, people who are just doing some reconnaissance work for the Russian army to bomb stuff or attack it at a certain point. So what would be better cover than, having, say, an American or a British passport and go around I'm just filming for my live stream, a bit like Gonzalo's doing, but he could be filming something else, or someone like him, or a Ukrainian, that then they would send to the Russians. And if they do it live on YouTube, then they can see in real time what's going on. And they were worried, obviously, that it would lead to something that might be attacked. So a good justification. Now, do you think I'm going to tell those soldiers, I have freedom of speech to go film whatever I want because I have these inalienable rights to just film stuff willy-nilly and put it on the internet? Of course not. It's a time of war. There's a security risk. I mean, you have to imagine that you're in a country where Russia is firing rockets and missiles, not even on the front line. Like yesterday in Odessa, they bombed a residential building, killed, when I saw, the mayor said 8 people dead, civilians. He said there was nothing there that was a military interest, and it's a rocket. It's not like a random dummy shell. So they basically targeted a residential area, one would assume on purpose, to terrorize the population. And Ukraine doesn't want people just filming even the aftermath, because you might be helping the Russians to then reconfigure and shoot, target again, or maybe target the people who've come to the rescue services, right, the ambulances and the firemen and stuff like that. So you have to be very careful. And I remember a Dutch journalist even got expelled from Ukraine for doing that in Odessa. So it's not a normal time. You don't have those normal freedoms. And just imagine being in London when the Germans were bombing it in World War II, bombing it to smithereens. Do you think you could have been Lord, what was his name, Lord Hoho? Or Haha, what was his name, Lord Hoho? Anyways, he was he was actually Irish-born British propagandist for the German government. He had kind of his own radio show, I think, for the German government during the war, and the Brits could hear it. And it basically was trying to demoralize British people at that time, that they were going to lose the war. Same stuff you hear from Scott Ritter, Colonel McGregor all the time, right? And imagine if he had not been in Germany, but sitting in London and spewing out all this. You think the British government would have said, that's fine, that's freedom of speech. Yeah, do your best, help the Germans, bomb us better. Of course not. Anyone with an IQ over 90 should understand you don't have those rights. And in fact, to go and film anything as a journalist, you actually need permission. You have to apply. You have to be there. The government has to agree that you can go to certain parts. And obviously it's different in the Russian-controlled parts because they have their own propagandists there. And you have guys like Patrick Lancaster who are filming under military escort all the time. But he's not there, with permission of the Ukrainian government whatsoever. They would say he's there illegally. So Gonzalo Lira, first of all, is just kind of at the end of the day, kind of like me, a guy that maybe has an interest in the topic, was living in Ukraine, had ironically also been doing a lot of stuff about relationships and dating beforehand, and then has just turned his attention to this because of the war. And he's not a journalist. Like, I'm not a journalist either. So to presume that he's this beacon of free speech and journalism, just giving the other perspective is complete baloney. He is there assisting an invading army, aiding and abetting them with his propaganda that he spews out. Now, if he was sitting, as I said, in another city, then that would be a different story. But of course, the Ukrainians are well within their rights legally to detain him. Now, I'm just assuming that's the only thing that's happened. There's nothing else untoward going on that he was involved in. And I'd be surprised they would release him after a week if he was actually up to something else other than that. Before I get to the very last thing that I'm going to show you, which really demonstrates why the Ukrainians would have detained him. I've always wondered about guys like this, like Gonzalo Lira, who are foreigners moved to Ukraine and then seem to hate the government. And I know he said that his wife, or the mother of his children, is Ukrainian and from Kharkiv. That might explain part of the reason. But if he loves the Russian form of government so much, why not just move to Russia? I mean, it's just there beside it. I used to have a business helping guys move from the West to the different countries in the region. It would have made more sense to just move to Russia. Why get involved in all this and be in a war zone and helping the invading army to destroy the country and install a puppet government, which he all explains that he's in favor of, when he's a guest in that country. Just don't get it. Why not just move to Russia in the first place and live under Putin's government? And if that's what you're looking for. He's not the only person I've met with this attitude, and it's always bewildered me. So let me finish the video with just a quick look at Gonzalo Lira's journalistic work. And to be candid, I didn't go back and look through his videos. There's like so many hours of them there. And after the first week, I just found it a bit nauseating to sit through any of his content. I found it so outrageous and disrespectful. But just a quick look at his Telegram channel and what he published, I think it was like the day before, around the time that he was detained by the SBU. So let's just take a look and see what's on it. So he circulates a clip of Gorky Park, which is a beautiful park in Kharkiv, one that I've walked around quite a bit, been there also with my clients, my friends, and it was shelled. And you have to remember or realize that Kharkiv has been very badly damaged in the city center. All those beautiful cafes, restaurants, bars I had in my videos, clubs, they got blown up. They needed to be denazified by the Russian government, apparently. And it's all wrecked. Gonzalo even went down himself previously and filmed from what he said was his favorite cafe, and it was destroyed.
Hi. This is my favorite chocolate shop. As you can see, I don't know how well you can see it.
And a lot of civilians have been killed in this shelling. It's not like they're just striking a military installation somewhere and that's it. Maybe a few soldiers get killed. No, civilians, ordinary people are killed in these. They also bombed the market in Kharkiv. So just absolutely terrible stuff, not justified whatsoever. Basically war crimes. And Gonzalo circulates this video with another one, which is Gorky Park getting shelled, right? So it's just a very nice park. But let me read the message just below it. I've been to Gorky Park many, many times with my children, a bit like me. Not with my children, but with my friends or clients. It has zero military value. Attacking this park serves no purpose other than to antagonize the people. Well, we completely agree on that, Gonzalo. Which is why I have no doubt that Zelensky regime thugs did this and are now blaming the Russians. Hold on a sec. Which is why I have no doubt. You have no doubt that in a time when Russia has invaded a country, are shelling and bombing civilian infrastructure in the country, which you were well aware of because you went and saw it yourself, that you have no doubt that it's the Zelensky regime thugs? Really? You have no doubt? You just made that up. That is a classic example of disinformation, right? He doesn't have any evidence or any proof or anything to do that. He just decided to say that it was the Ukrainian government and not the Russian government who did this, right? And they're now blaming the Russians. Really, you're blaming the Ukrainians for something the Russians did in a disinformation attempt. And we agree that it's got no military purpose and it's just simply to terrorize the local population. So on a personal note, this really, really pisses me off. Yeah, Gonzalo, also pisses me off that they did this. There is absolutely no reason to do this. Agreed. As far as I'm concerned, this is the evil of the Zelensky regime in a nutshell. I think you mean the evil of the Putin regime, right, Gonzalo? Destroy something beautiful. He continues, destroy something beautiful and blame the Russians. Ah, you mean the Russians destroy something beautiful and you blame the Ukrainians. I want them held responsible. Well, there we're in perfect agreement, Gonzalo. I want all those war criminals, whether they're Ukrainian or Russian, in this war held responsible. All the people who looted, raped, killed civilians, tortured POWs, murdered POWs, bombed civilian infrastructure, starved people, and other war crimes, and we may even be talking about genocide before the end of this war. It's that horrific. I want every single one of those people held responsible. And you know what else I want held responsible? Liar, Lira, those who aided and abetted those people who blew up Gorky Park. And from what I can see, the Ukrainian government, local authorities in Kharkiv have made a little step to holding one foreign guest responsible for his attempts to aid and abet the Russian invading army when they did that in Gorky Park. Slava Ukraini.
SAR Experience.